A Quiet Evening, written by Unwise Acre, read by Arashi. Since the beginning of their relationship, Ferdinand has become known for his tendency to go to lengths Hubert rather wishes he wouldn't for the sake of his birthday. Last year, he had relocated 11 scarlet oak trees from Ayr and had them planted in what Enbar citizens are now calling the, quote, True Jewel Celebration Park, unquote. The year before that, it had been a bronze statue of Hubert erected in the palace grounds. Mercifully, it had depicted him fully clothed. Hubert later heard that Her Majesty had talked Ferdinand down from commissioning a solid gold statue of the couple in each other's arms, and the possibility of depicting him naked from the waist up had, in fact, been raised. With all that in mind, Hubert is relieved that Ferdinand has sworn against any similar extravagances this year. Instead, he'd promised Hubert a quiet birthday. They would simply take coffee together, and gifts would be small and kept out of the eyes of the citizenry. The evening sun of the great tree moon casts warm, pink light into Hubert's office. He watches silently as Ferdinand pours 2 cups of coffee, a mixture of evening sun and candlelight shimmering off of the rich darkness as it settles in each cup. Fragrant steam rises from both cups, and he hears Ferdinand inhale deeply as he takes his own cup. Ferdinand, as ever, is a sight to behold. Sitting with his back to the sunset, his handsome face is haloed by amber waves, tied back neatly with a wide ribbon of burgundy velvet, and as bright as fire where the soft curls catch the light of the setting sun. He wears a dress coat of crushed velvet, the reddish-pink color of the early dusk. Hubert supposes that dressing to match the sky at any given time of day is exactly the sort of endearing, frivolous thing he has come to expect from Ferdinand, but damned if he isn't strikingly beautiful nonetheless. Despite taking coffee in the warmth of a mid-spring sunset, what would surely be a soothing atmosphere for anyone else, Hubert finds himself tense as ever. Ferdinand insisted that he take a moment aside from his duties to take coffee with him, but House Vestra's work is almost as relentless in peacetime as in war. Now, even with Fodlan united and Shambhala gutted, Her Majesty's rule remains under threat. New word of rebellions, peasant uprising, and Agarthian splinter cells reaches Hubert day after day, and Ferdinand knows as well as Hubert that House Vestra's role doesn't end with the management of the imperial household. It's Hubert's solemn duty to investigate every new morsel of information, no matter how implausible. Every lead has to be followed to its end. Hubert has witnessed from both sides how burning candles left unattended can incinerate an empire in the blink of an eye, and one still finding its feet was even more vulnerable. Few and far between though such engagements have become, Hubert worries that every moment spent away from his work has the potential for hazard. If a threat slips by him due to a lead left unexamined, or work postponed for the sake of frivolity, he could lose such pleasant distractions entirely. The Empire could fall, Her Majesty could suffer, Ferdinand could suffer. Hubert often wonders if he hadn't been better suited to a solitary life, fighting the Empire's never-ending, hidden wars through any means necessary, never once haunted by the near certainty that one day Ferdinand would fall prey to one of his many enemies, or that one such necessary evil would prove too much for Ferdinand to bear. Neither of them is a stranger to war, but war, on the battlefield or in the shadows, is all Hubert knows, and he recalls a not-so-distant time when he was content with that. Ferdinand, who can thrive in both peace and war, and see joy rather than wasted time in birthday arrangements, is a different creature to Hubert entirely, and Hubert is terrified of losing him. Indeed, the countless termites in the woodwork of Her Majesty's empire won't cease their gnawing just so that Hubert can spend an evening celebrating his birthday with his lover. Something Ferdinand knows, but seems to have no problem ignoring. Of course, as the only halfway honest politician in the history of Fodland, a rare jewel indeed, making time for people is as much Ferdinand's job as pest control is his own. Hubert supposes that in Ferdinand's mind, the people likely includes him, an amusing thought. If he must put his own work on hold, at least, by some stretch of logic, he might say he's helped Ferdinand with his own. Ferdinand's strong hands cradle the delicate porcelain cup the way one might hold a small bird. He takes a sip of coffee. The usual reflexive curl of his lip is absent. Hubert's breath catches in his throat. His mind floods with suspicion, and even as he counts off the many innocent explanations for the small difference, he momentarily feels the chill of each dagger hidden close to his skin. He trains his expression into nonchalance, but Ferdinand must pick up on his worry because he smiles sheepishly and sets his cup down. "Ah, my apologies. I might have known my newfound taste for coffee would cause alarm, especially since I usually take tea." Ferdinand moves to take Hubert's hand across the desk, and Hubert lets him, although remaining coiled to strike. "You need not panic, my love. As you know, since the start of our relationship, I have been training myself to appreciate coffee, and I have redoubled my efforts as of late. I have been drinking nothing but this particular roast for some time, and actually, I think I might even prefer it to most teas now. His cheeks flush the approximate color of his coat as he adds, "It has also allowed me to feel close to you, even when we are forced apart by work. I think that may have been the most important factor in my eventual success." Ferdinand squeezes his hand gently. The feeling is faint, but he can feel his warm, strong, familiar grip. The familiar touch does little to comfort him. There is little Ferdinand can do to prove his identity beyond room for doubt, and they both knew it. Those who slither in the dark can mimic the warmth of someone's hand as surely as they can his voice and face. Ferdinand's thumb ghosts over his knuckles. "Hubert, if I may return to an old argument for a moment, as our enemies grow fewer, you seem to become ever more tense. Even you must stop to breathe now and again. I believe Edelgard has told you as much as well, including when we were arranging this meeting." A thread of discomfiture runs through Hubert at the thought of Ferdinand and Her Majesty discussing him in his absence. It makes perfect sense, of course. Their one-time rivalry has grown into a reliable, working friendship. Finding himself the subject of discussion, however, Hubert feels almost nostalgia for the days when all that Ferdinand shared with Her Majesty were platitudes that asserted his own superiority. Ferdinand continues, "You do not have to shoulder the weight of the entire empire by yourself any more than she does. Each of us has our own load to bear, as the wings and body of the eagle, as it were, and as yours seems to have grown heavier by the day. I fear that you will run yourself into the ground if you do not learn to delegate." Suspicion yields to irritation. Though Hubert knows Ferdinand speaks the truth as he sees it, he is no less annoyed by the return of a familiar argument. He exhales deeply and prepares to concede, when his eye catches on a faint ripple in his coffee cup. Moments later, he notices the cause, the barely perceptible tremble in Ferdinand's leg under the desk. Suspicion crawls back like a groveling canine, and with it, venom. "Oh, but I'm not the only one who's tense, am I?" he hisses, pulling his hand out of Ferdinand's grasp. Hurt and alarm plays into Ferdinand's expression the way only genuine emotion can. The usual fear of an unmasked impostor doesn't follow. Hubert curses himself inwardly. "I think that proves my point, Hubert. Apologies for whatever I have done to arouse such suspicion, but if I am tense, perhaps it is because today is not quite progressing as I had hoped." Ferdinand finally withdraws his hand and returns to cradling his cup. Hubert curses himself again. Apologies for jumping to conclusions. Must Huberts always sound so insincere? Truthfully, I may be unreasonably quick to agitation of late. Perhaps there is merit in your suggestion after all. I believe there is. That is why I said so. I accept your apology, at any rate. Let us try to enjoy today, all right? Ferdinand takes another sip of his coffee before changing the subject. "I believe I told you a while ago Rosalind was expecting. The Pegasus you adopted? I recall you saying as much. One of the Pegasi, yes." Over the course of the war, Ferdinand had adopted no less than 5 Fargan military Pegasi that had been found wandering after battle. He had declared the arrangement a challenge, both for himself and for the creatures, given that he was a man, and Pegasi were documented to resist almost all men. To Hubert's knowledge, even 3 years later, none of the beasts had allowed Ferdinand to mount them, although, by his own accounts, most of them had warmed up to him enough to let him care for them. "She finally gave birth yesterday evening. It was an easy birth. I was present throughout, of course, and, oh, Hubert, you should see the foal. A colt, black as the darkest of nights. Ah, such a splendid creature. Why, just this morning he was out, gambling in the paddock with the others, all with the vigor and grace of a mature stallion." Hubert feels the corner of his lip twitching. He is more at ease now, increasingly convinced, but never completely certain, that his prior reaction was unfounded. It would be incredibly difficult for an impostor to capture the feverish passion with which Ferdinand talks about horses. "As a matter of fact," he continues, "I think you should see this foal. I recall you telling me that you used to dream of riding the Imperial Pegasi as a child, and considering the timing of this one's birth, seeing the color of the coat, witnessing its resilience, I cannot help but think that this must be a sign that he was meant to be yours. If you wish, you can consider it a second birthday present." Hubert elects not to point out the many barriers in him owning, much less making use of a Pegasus, in light of Ferdinand's excitement. Besides, he's not wrong. Although he's long since abandoned any hope of riding one, Hubert has an enduring fondness for Pegasi, left over from his, sadly figurative, childhood flights of fancy. All of the embarrassing little details brought up in passing, of course Ferdinand would remember that one. He supposes agreeing to visit the beast means more time spent with Ferdinand, although he would have to think of a way to make time for it that would have the least impact on his work. Speaking of birthday presents, Ferdinand rises, adjusting his ribbon again, and slips around to Hubert's side of the desk. Since we agreed I'm to make no grand gestures this year, I thought, instead, I would give you the greatest gift of all. He waits a beat before adding, myself, of course. A smirk parts Hubert's lips. I gathered. A bronze statue and some trees were little compared to the simpler delights Hubert had always preferred. He stands and pulls Ferdinand into an embrace with a hand at the small of his back. But in my office, Ferdinand. How bold of you. He kisses Ferdinand deeply, and feels him chuckle contentedly into the kiss, prompting him to kiss ever deeper, eventually breaking off to trace smaller kisses along his jawline. Hubert's free hand loosened his cravat to pull it free before turning his attention to his neck. He pauses his descent a moment to murmur against Ferdinand's newly bared throat, I must say, you've truly outdone yourself this year. Ferdinand sighs blissfully. He returns to Ferdinand's mouth for another deep, coffee-scented kiss, and raising his hands to Ferdinand's hair, he tugs at the ribbon, keeping it bound, but Ferdinand clasps his hands in his own to halt him. Wait, leave my hair for now. Telling me how to unwrap my birthday gift? That simply won't do. Hubert purrs, but obliges, and instead undoes the buttons of Ferdinand's overcoat while delivering a firm bite to his throat. Ferdinand gasps, and Hubert mows ever lower. Ferdinand finishes tying his cravat, and reaches out to straighten Hubert's rumpled collar. I suppose now is the time to confess that I've missed our little trysts. Tonight has been wonderful. Thank you, Ferdinand. Although I fear we have neglected the coffee, I can honestly say there is nowhere I would rather have been tonight than here with you. Ferdinand's face, already flushed with exertion, burns brighter. You are quite welcome, and it has been wonderful, has it not? I only wish our trysts were more frequent these days. With that in mind, I think you should let loose my hair now. You've been favoring that ribbon all evening. Very well, let's see what you've been keeping from me. He notices Ferdinand is trembling again, and he picks apart the secure double knot and tugs the now loose ribbon out of his hair, freeing the soft, lightly perfumed waves at last. He notices Ferdinand's eyes briefly skim the floor, and he hears the faintest breath of relief, as if he expected something to fall. Clutching the rumpled layers of thick velvet, Hubert feels something round and solid at the center. What's this? He whispers, more of a rhetorical question, as he unfurls the bundle of fabric in his palm. He notices something glimmering within, and his heart all but stops as he realizes what he's holding. Before he can finish, Ferdinand abruptly clasps both of his hands over Hubert's own, and Hubert watches in stunned silence as he drops to his knees. One knee. All at once, Hubert is overridden by unbridled, disbelieving terror, hinged with painful longing. When Ferdinand next speaks, it takes more willpower than Hubert knew he had not to break out of his grasp and walk away, covering both ears. What was he so afraid of? Hubert von Vestra, I humbly ask that you grant me your— Wait! What is the meaning of this? Why would you ever— Hubert cuts off abruptly, afraid he'll choke on his own leaping heart. Because, listen, when I said I was your gift this year, I meant that in more ways than one. Right now, you are not just holding a ring. You hold in your hand my very body and soul. He presses his lips to Hubert's hand. He lingers there a moment, taking in deep breaths through his nose before finally pulling away to meet Hubert's eyes. You know, there was so much more I wished to say. I spent hours rehearsing, and now that we are here, I find I want nothing more than to speak plainly instead. Hubert von Vestra, would you accept this gift? Would you do the honor of becoming my husband? The halting breaths in Hubert's chest give way to laughter. How intrinsically Ferdinand to find some way to create a scene between the two of them, and manage to completely surpass Hubert's most outlandish predictions, besides, and his expression is so completely earnest, and he looks so wounded at Hubert's laughter. Hubert can't even force himself to consider the possibility that he might be joking. Apologies, I don't mean to laugh. It's just— have you thought about this? Do you honestly believe that I am even remotely marriageable? Ferdinand looks deeply hurt, and for a moment Hubert is afraid he might start to cry, or let go of his hand, or perhaps both. Instead, he takes another deep, steadying breath and speaks. Of course I've thought about this. He deflates somewhat and drops his raised knee, though he keeps Hubert's hand in his. I have spent years considering this very thoroughly, waiting for the right moment. One might think my previous gifts to you might have given you some idea that I always intended to spend the rest of my life with you. I might have done this sooner, had I not spent many a sleepless night plagued by visions of you, well, laughing in my face. He glances up at him reproachfully. I have considered your devotion to your work in the shadows and the many burdens it places on you, and I know that I am more than capable of shouldering those burdens alongside you. Furthermore, I love you with all of my being, and I truly believe that there is nothing that could make me fall out of love with you. Does that answer satisfy you? Hubert is struck silent once more. He breaks out of Ferdinand's grasp and sinks heavily into a chair, head in his hands. A minute passes in silence. Ferdinand stays kneeling, and Hubert knows that if he looks at his face, he'll look just like any other wounded man waiting to be put out of his misery. Surely he already knows the only possible answer. He hardly needed to even ask, let alone wait for a response, looking for all the world like his life is ending. But of course, Ferdinand is going to make Hubert answer him. Ferdinand always has to do things the correct way, and a traditional proposal demands a response. Although hiding the ring in his hair was a rather unique twist on the original format. Hubert bites back another laugh at the thought. He takes a deep breath to calm the rebellion in his chest. As long as you are sure. Does that mean? Yes, Ferdinand, it means yes. I love you so deeply it defies description, and if you'll have me, I will gladly marry you.